The notation reads, "What follows are the memories of where my end began. May you never have cause to read them, lest you find yourself on the same path." Masguard. Date illegible. Chapter 1. Masguard's personal log, page 1. The trouble with memory isn't so much that it lies. If I, in the private corners of my mind, paint your first steps as bolder, or your mother's smile as brighter than perhaps it really was, so much the better. My grief is lessened, and your histories remain undisturbed by the color of my brush. No, the trouble with memory comes in painting too long, in staring so solidly at the mural that the imperfections mount into something that casts a shadow you cannot escape, until you reach back and find only darkness clawing after you. And claw it will, because memory is rarely content to remain in the past. And the problem with the past is that it's always right behind you. I didn't yet carry much of a past as I trudged the desert on the day that would change everything. It was winter, but the desert cared nothing for that. Sense, season, and the rest of the world had been scorched from here, having required no assistance beyond the turning of a blind eye. I myself was smaller then, not in size, but in understanding. My career was young, and youthful inexperience had me thinking simply that the sand had no right to be so hot. Not when my crew was tired and aching for the snow that should have dressed the dunes in the trappings of a different season. They'd been nearly a year ashore at this point. After months of search and toil, forcing them to sweat even after the job was done seemed the height of cruelty. So I sent them on to prepare the ship while I met with our client, which is where the memory begins in earnest. I remember the sizzle and the grain. I remember the rough and pressure and the heat of my breath. I remember every inch of it so clearly that I often wonder whether it happened at all. Maybe my efforts to paint the memory into something less jagged have colored it beyond recollection. So much has been lost that I can hardly imagine it was ever once so simple as a bit of sand, a snowless sky. Even shadows start small, I suppose. You will know the region only as the Wastes. Map and tongue have spent so many centuries warning wayfarers from its shores that they've long forgotten it ever had a name. To them, its name was famine. Its name was drought. They called it lightning and a terrible end. Like the sand, its true name was innocent. Corin. A word that once danced from farmers and naturalists who gushed over fertile fields and crystal springs. That was before the Season Lord came and scorched the land until no bare inch of it could be used by creature or crop. In a flash of history's eye, Corin crumbled. But the wastes never did. A rotting corpse come to life. They grew. They swallowed what was and used the bite of razor-sharp mountains to cut themselves away from the world. As of this writing, they stand defiant and howling at the southernmost tip of Socorro, accessible only by a single, harrowing path. It is a great stretch of sand that isn't sand at all, but the meal of 1,000 castles crying to be remembered. Listen closely, and you will hear them, as I did. Be wise, and you shall ignore them, as I didn't. Like me, like those who had come before and those who will die long after this account is lost, Marquess Sham was underestimating the desert's madness when she laid claim to it. An up-and-coming debutante from one of the oldest families in the noble circle, she seemed determined to turn a profit on the land that fate forgot. Rumor abounded that she'd even begun work on a manor overlooking a valley that showed some promise of being revitalized. But the dream hardly lasted. It wasn't long before every call to council or gala sent her scurrying into the unfinished skeleton of her manor, where she abandoned social obligation and pored over maps and transcripts like a rat possessed. Many believed her to be suffering from heat stroke, but no. Word was the mad Marquess was searching for something, a mysterious artifact, a relic as old as the wastes themselves. I found it, of course, for that is what I do. And here on these tattered pages is the only place you will ever hear me admit as much. When I arrived, her tower was nearing completion, a gaudy, rancid-looking thing. It jutted from the sand like a cancerous growth. Exhaustion had me hoping for a quick exchange and a relaxing waltz into the sunset, but the malnourished servants had other ideas. The Marquess wished to meet with me in her study, which was, of course, in some sickly tower in the most distant wing. Because her people had the downcast eyes of those who suffered their place quietly, I didn't argue as fervently as I might have. Noblemen always do this sort of thing, you see, especially with other noblemen. Taking the long way past one another's lavish possessions is part and parcel of membership in the noble circle. "The best that money can buy," they always jump to say, apparently having no idea that their words feel like an invitation to set fire to their idols and trinkets. The smoke would certainly give their high-held noses something to smell, but that would be rude, and rude is often bad for business. So I bite my tongue and walk the long way, making faces at the fine family portraits to appease my sense of scorn. They led me at last to a room of function and excess that I eventually guessed was the study. With mouldy scrolls and maps littering every elaborate fixture, it was difficult to imagine the shelves were ever meant to carry books. The floor was damp, but clean. The grand fireplace was polished to a shine, but the mantel was so overrun with hastily stored candles that I could see little beyond their glare. The smell of an open wine bottle colluded with the ash on the tapestries, musty and sweet in the worst way. It forced me to use shallow breaths as I bowed my thanks to the servant with the trembling knees. His only response came in the form of 1,000 apologies that seemed directed at no one.
"No one wishes to watch you dawdle,"
a voice barked from the far end of the room before I could speak.
"Off with you!"
Sorry.
I turned to raise an eyebrow at the source of the voice, while the servant rushed from the room like his heels were on fire. Marquess Sham had never deigned to meet with me prior to this moment. I realize now that she probably had reason for that. Though the rat was younger than me by a number of years, her frail hands and sagging belly jittered so beneath her silks that she looked not just old, but cracked, like a papier-mâché marionette that had been left too long in the sun. Her tail was missing, or rather it had been shorn to a thin handful of inches that were grossly askew and impossible to ignore. Fur sprouted from her face in patches, none of which were even remotely similar in color. She also had a twisted sort of smile that turned into a sneer every time she rocked back in her chair. And she rocked back a great deal.
"Masguard the relic hunter,"
she said, her tone haughty and distant.
"I was beginning to think you wouldn't return. Did you, take time off to search for your timepiece, I wonder?"
If the job had been an easy one, Marquess. I gestured to the many scrolls that had clearly been of no assistance to her. I imagine you'd have done it yourself, no? She stopped rocking.
"Quite so, I'm sure."
Her twisted smile tightened until her face looked just as stretched as her welcoming.
"Done, you say?"
Something about the way she said it made me uncomfortable. There was hope behind her words, but it wasn't of the sunny sort. Cautiously, I withdrew her prize from my satchel. The urn made a shrill sound as I placed it on the overlarge desk and watched her eyes widen.
"Fate alive,"
she whispered.
You really found it?"
"That is what you're paying me for," I reminded simply. With some effort, she came to her feet, though not to reach for her coin purse.
Did you open it?"
She stumbled a little as she spoke, like someone unaccustomed to standing on her own 2 feet. I tried not to scoff at what she said. Early though it was in my career, I recognized the difference between an occupational hazard and a foolish choice. The urn had been nearly impossible to recover, meaning someone had felt it dangerous enough to hide, but too useful to destroy. Having yet to stumble across anything of true power, I felt it was just as likely to contain a hefty dose of plague as anything worthy of her apparent obsession. I thought I'd leave the honor to you, I said. How kind. The bulbous rat eyed me suspiciously, then licked her lips and seemed to remember the open bottle of wine. Would you care for a glass? It's an excellent year. The best that money can buy. You might be tempted to believe I added that last bit only to prove my point. You would be mistaken. Thank you for the offer, but I really must be getting back to my ship. After more than a year in dock, she deserves to feel the wind again, and there are arrangements to be made. Sham waved a hand. Neither of us cares to dawdle, Relic Hunter. Believe you me, but I'll not pay you until I've verified that this is indeed the relic you were contracted to hunt. I managed not to scowl, but only because I was too distracted by the way she stared at the urn. Her eyes were hungry, her hands flexed. She leaned over the desk a little too abruptly, and my hand shot immediately and discreetly to the pommel of my sword. It came as a shock when she ignored me altogether, tore open the urn, dumped its ashes to her desk, and tossed the relic aside. I tried to hold my tongue. There are kinder ways of wasting a year of someone's life, you know, I said when the try and failed. Don't be an idiot, Masguard, she said, stooping to the desk. The urn wasn't the relic, I would think. Considering your line of work, you would recognize as much. I lifted a finger to defend myself. It was quickly swallowed by the cloud of soot that came blasting over my burgundy coat when she coughed the ash away from the real relic. A stone. A simple, unassuming hunk of rock. What is this? I asked, my curiosity more piqued than it should have been. Some sort of rare earth? A jewel? The Marquess sneered. Indeed, looking back, I knew how desperately inadequate the word must have sounded to anyone who knew its true name, as she did. Though it looked hardly more than a lump of coal to me as it sat untouched on her desk, it brought a light to her eyes that would have surprised me were she staring at the brightest of stars. Jewel? She echoed, a bit of spittle hanging from her lips. No, Jewel doesn't cover it by half, Masguard. Not by half. Reaching toward it, she shook her head and spoke as if to herself. This is the reason we all came to this horrible place. The reason this place is horrible to begin with. It changed the rules. Understand? Upended fate in a way that hasn't been seen in the eons before nor since. What you're looking at is no jewel, you foolish explorer. It is the most powerful object of our day. It is quite possibly the most powerful object in all of history. I may have scoffed, loudly. That's a bold claim is all, I said, her glare having forced me to rephrase. And one I've heard before, but so long as you're satisfied enough to fetch my fee, that's none of my affair. You think me a liar, do you? She said as she withdrew her hand. Now feeling genuinely concerned over the status of my paycheck, I backtracked so far as pride would allow. Not at all, I said. I just find it odd that I've not heard of this particular artifact prior to now, considering my line of work. I was disappointed when she missed my barb and offered none of her own. Magic wouldn't be worthwhile if it made itself so easily known, would it? She said too calmly, as though reciting something from memory. Magic? I asked, taking no pains to hide my skepticism. From a rock. This thing could no more be magic than my hands could be butterflies. Could it?
Magic, Masguard, yes, she said. Power. You must believe that items have power, mustn't you? Why else would you set out into the world to find them?
I do what I do because I believe items have history, Marquess, I said sincerely. Stories, just as you and I do. Tales of making and existing and changing hands. And I believe those stories must be told. I'm sorry if that disappoints any romantic views about my field, but it is as simple as that.
No.
The rat shook her head until her jowls quivered.
That's what you tell yourself, but I see it in you, the hunger, the craving for the hunt, the hope that one day you'll make a discovery that will change the world forever.
I felt a surge of discomfort that only increased with her next words.
Well, you've done it, Masguard. Even if you can't see it. Fate alive, have you done it?
The relic changed the moment she took it in her hand. It wasn't a trick of the light, as I thought at first. It was a fire, small and heatless, that sprang to life behind the stone's walls. It burned like the sand, becoming reddish, becoming electric, and mesmerizing in a way that baked an emptiness into the pit of my stomach. The light began to pulse a slow and steady rhythm, like a heartbeat from a living thing. I swallowed when I realized the heartbeat rose to match the pulsing in her wrist, where a horrid scar brought veins to the visible surface. Marquess Sham was right. This was no stone, no simple jewel, and it would indeed change the world. But she wouldn't live to see it. From nowhere, the silence fell. Fireplace and clock struck an uneasy stillness that seemed to disturb the Marquess into forgetting her obsession, if only for an instant. Time slowed until every motion felt a crawl, every thought an eon. Then, all at once, the quiet broke. The window shattered, an explosion of sound and strength that burst into the study, snuffing the fire and drowning the room in darkness. A thunderclap and the wind threw me into the far wall. Unfinished wood slammed the air from my lungs as maps and scrolls danced to the crashing of oil lamps and the shaking of shelves.
God.
I gasped. I peered up through the long and shifting shadows. I could swear they were peering back.
Marquess!
I coughed and called through the chaos.
Marquess Sham!
Her response was lost in another gust of wind. Bits of glass dripped from my burgundy coat as I pushed myself from the floor and stared in horror at the storm invading the manor. Furniture had been blasted in an arc from a great hole in the wall where the window should have been. But for a clump of fur and silk near her upended desk, the Marquess was nowhere to be seen. I should have turned tail on the instant. Instead, I struggled my way through the room and called for her again.
Here!
I heard her weak and desperate cry at last.
I'm here!
The rat's leg was pinned beneath the heavy oak of her desk. That clump of fur, as it turned out, was her foot. She clawed at my lapels.
You have to get me out of here!
She screamed, eyes wide with fear.
He's coming! And if I don't take it to them, they'll never understand. They'll never see what I have seen.
What in blazes is going on? I yelled back, snapping the armrest from a nearby chair and levering it beneath the desk. Who's coming?
The one they want. The one they've been searching for. And he'll take it. Don't you see? He'll take it and no one will ever know the truth.
She pulled and clawed, her panic leaving no room for anything else.
Out! Get me out! Get me out!
Rudely, I gripped her jaw and forced her to look at me. I will get you out. I am getting you out. But you must calm down. Now I'm going to lift the desk off of you. but it's too heavy for me to hold for long. You'll have to slide yourself out once I've lifted it. Do you think you can do that?" She licked her lips with a dry and jittery tongue, giving no mind to the stack of letters chomping at the air around her mouth. I had visions of paper cuts and missing vowels as her heavy cheeks bowed in what I assumed was a nod. "I can do more than that," she said. I was lifting the desk from her leg when she fixed on me, seeming too still, too willing to follow instruction. "I can see," she droned on. "They may never see now, but I still do. He's coming. He's here. And how? Did he follow you, Masguard?" Only then did I realize that she, despite the fear and pain, still had firm hold of the relic, along with the letter opener. I was still holding the desk when she attacked. "You knew, didn't you?" she spat. "You led him here." I leapt away, but not in time. The letter opener found purchase in my cheek before the desk came crashing back down on her foot. And again she howled, "Masguard!" Jowls trembling, fur on end, she cursed my name. A meager common name that wouldn't have become synonymous with land and history and great discoveries were it not for the way she called it out then and there in her broken manner. She screamed, and the name was heard, not only by the lightning and the whipping wind, but by the one who beckoned them to her doorstep. Roosted, the Season Lord. An old god and a present demon. He shot into the room with static in his shadow. He was feather and talon, presence and fear. His skin crackled with the buzzing of a storm, and his beak fractured along spidery faults that oozed sound the way a boiler oozes steam. He filled the world. And when he shrieked, it broke the sky. Only then, as she was covering her ears and gaping at the enormous monster in terror, did the Marquess drop the relic. Despite the roar of the wind, I could swear I heard it striking the ground, clink for clink, as it bounded over the floor toward my feet. The Season Lord certainly did. He turned, and I could only swallow as he watched it roll past me and into the fireplace. I locked eyes with him, with murder and rage and all the blackness of every horrible impulse a mind could hold. "No!" I heard the Marquess cry, snapping me from my awe. Frenzied beyond all sense, she yanked against the desk, clawing at the wood and reaching for the relic in the broken light like something from a nightmare. "Get away from here, you monster! You fiend! It's mine now! You hear me? Mine!" I took a chance. I moved. And so did the Season Lord. Scorched wings, sweeping tapestries from walls that couldn't hold him, Ustum shot forward, moving like a great ship, forceful and battered, crushing waves beneath the keel and paying them no mind. He sent the desk barreling over the Marquess's spine without noticing or caring. Just like that, the tailless rat stumbled to a snapping halt against one of her elaborate bookcases, a maniacal gurgle fixed behind bared teeth. The shock of it made me stumble headlong into the fireplace. When I turned to seek escape, my foot brushed against something smooth beneath the ash. Ustum ground his talons into the floor in a sudden halt. Arching his wings, he lowered his head and shrieked a cry more frantic than furious. A cry that shook my bones along with those of the manor until the coals beneath my hands and knees shivered themselves apart and the ceiling threatened to cave. Confusion bubbled beneath my fear. Without a doubt, the Season Lord was the largest, strongest, most intimidating thing I had ever encountered. He had found us so suddenly, as if the relic had sent him a summoning or a cry for help. He'd molded the weather to his will and murdered the Marquess without a second thought. He had me cornered, helpless, a shaken pile of nothing at his feet. So why had he stopped? For an explorer, there are few things as gnawing as an unanswered question. We push on when others would go back, even in the darkest of unmapped forests. We do this because our affliction of curiosity over caution runs deep, because the unknown on the other side of the mystery is the only tonic for what ails us. We cannot stand a riddle. We can't abide why. Why had he stopped? I drove my hand into the red-hot ash. The smell of singed hair burned my nose more than the coals burned my skin as my fingers scrambled and eventually closed around it. Like ice at the nape of your neck, or feeling someone's gaze from across the room, the stone was cold. So very cold. Ustam watched, roiling and seething on the other side of the hearth. His great head quirked this way and that in rapid, murderous spasms. Breath held, eyes on the demon bird, I pulled the gem from the soot, just as the Marquess had done only moments before.
You're here for this, aren't you?
I said above the wind. His cracked beak hissed. His feathers shook with rage. Still, he did not advance.
Why don't you take it from me then?
For all the honesty with which the question was asked, I knew that I was goading him. I couldn't help myself.
You destroyed the waste. You've crushed and killed all for this. Why? Why stop now when you're this close?
His answering shriek was dreadful. He lunged and scored the floor. The storm grew until I found myself wishing for a line to hold me to the ground. Was he trying to frighten me into dropping the gem? If so, static built, and lightning jumped until I almost gave him what he wanted. Almost.
The Marquess was telling the truth, wasn't she?
I yelled over the rising gale.
This relic is powerful, isn't it? Even more powerful than you. How can that be? What is this?
I surprised myself with the strength of my voice, the desperation in my inquiry. His jagged wings spread out and around the room in response, driving cloud and wind and darkness until I could hear nothing, see nothing.
What is this?
I yelled again, hoisting the thing over my head. He wheeled, he screamed. He flung the Marquess's crumpled body into the fireplace. But for all his terror and rage, there was something else in his eyes. Something worse than angry storms and impossible magic. It was pain. Such awful, gut-wrenching pain. Colder and colder, the gem pressed against my palm as though willing escape. I hissed with the chill that crept through my veins and waited for an answer that would never come. Just as I was beginning to think he would trap me forever in the ash, the wind became strength without speed. Just as it had when Ustam arrived, time slowed until papers hung on the air like puppets, until the smoke pouring from the coals beneath my feet swirled to a standstill. I looked to the great bird in confusion, but he seemed no less bewildered than I. The Season Lord was tensing, preparing for something. But he wasn't watching me, not anymore. From beyond the window, I heard a slither and a hissing breath. Ustam heard it too. A final screech burst from his beak like a pallbearer's lament. Then, just like that, this master of things I would never understand engulfed himself in lightning and shot from the window. Only death remained in his wake. After a time, it was joined by silence.
What?
I shook until the smoke had shivered away. I gasped as though I'd never tasted air. And I stood in the coals until the sweat on my skin had frozen in place and a servant came to see about the wine. The staff covered the Marquess's body and fled that very night, no doubt with nightmares on their heels. I gathered my grit and painted the memory over, tucked it away like a child who closes his eyes to banish the darkness. Later, when my crew would ask what had happened in the gaudy building that once stood on the edge of the wastes, I wouldn't admit to having kept the relic responsible for its downfall. I'd say nothing of the emptiness in my gut, or the dread in my spine that only seemed to worsen as the days wore on into weeks. Like the maps that once knew the desert's name, I uttered the lies so often and so forcefully that I came to believe them. I told my crew only that the desert's secrets had given no quarter. Then I told myself that the stone was just a stone, and wiped my brow in believing that the only souls in all the world who knew the path into this fate-forsaken place were now leaving it, never to return. This was my first encounter with the Rook of Corin. I had hoped it would be my last.